Welcome to WikiPodcast.
Great to be here.
Today, we're diving deep into a truly seismic shift in history. We're talking about the transformation of Christianity.
Yeah, from this, fringe, often persecuted religious movement.
Exactly, into the dominant faith of the Roman Empire. It's a huge story.
Absolutely massive.
And you, our listener, we're keen to understand this monumental change, so we've gathered a whole lot of fascinating information to unpack it all.
We're zeroing in on the era of Constantine the Great, mostly.
Right, he's pivotal.
Yeah?
And this fits perfectly into our ongoing exploration of religion and power. This is really from Jesus to Caesar, how Christianity conquered an empire, part one, maybe.
You could definitely frame it that way. It's fascinating, the sheer audacity of this transition, isn't it?
It really is.
I mean, for centuries, Christians operated, well, often in the shadows, facing suspicion, sometimes brutal repression.
Yeah.
So to see them rise to such prominence within the very empire that tried to stamp them out, it's a story packed with intrigue.
And politics, definitely.
Oh, loads of political maneuvering and just these profound, lasting consequences for how faith and, earthly power interact.
Absolutely. So we'll start by looking at the world Christians lived in before Constantine. What were the dangers, the challenges?
Right.
Then we'll get into his conversion, that dramatic turning
What's
point.
the visions, the battle, yeah.
The Edict of Milan, what did it really mean? His active support for the church, how he acted as a Christian emperor, which was totally new.
Unprecedented, yeah.
And finally, the long-term impact, that whole idea of the Constantinian shift.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay, so let's set the stage. Before Constantine, what was the landscape like for Christians in the Roman Empire?
Well, life for early Christians was precarious. Definitely precarious.
How so?
The first recorded official persecution, the one historians point to, started under Emperor Nero.
Nero, okay.
Around 64 AD, Tacitus, the Roman historian, he talks about how Nero needed a scapegoat for the Great Fire of Rome.
Of the Great Fire. Wow.
And he pinned the blame on the Christians. Classic scapegoating.
And church tradition says Peter and Paul were martyred then.
That's the tradition, yes, Peter and Paul. So a pretty grim beginning for the church's relationship with the empire.
Talk about being caught in the crossfire, literally and figuratively. And it sounds like this wasn't just a one-off thing. This hostility continued.
Oh, absolutely. For the next, 2.5 centuries, Christians faced these sporadic, sometimes localized, but persistent persecutions.
Why, though? What was the core issue?
A central problem was their refusal to participate in the imperial cult.
The imperial cult.
Yeah.
That's like worshiping the emperor as a god and the Roman gods.
Pretty much, yeah. It was seen as a civic duty, a way to show loyalty to Rome.
And Christians couldn't do that.
Their monotheism wouldn't allow it. So this led to accusations of treason.
Treason, that's serious.
Very serious, punishable by death. It's interesting, though. Historians debate if Rome even clearly distinguished between Christians and Jews initially.
Oh.
Yeah, until maybe around 96 AD, Nerva modified this tax, the Fiscus Judaicus.
The Jewish tax?
Right. After 96, practicing Jews paid it, but Christians didn't, so that kind of legally separated them in the eyes of the state.
Okay, so it wasn't constant empire-wide terror, but more like flare-ups. Different places, different times.
Exactly. Flare-ups. Localized, often depending on the governor or the current emperor's mood, maybe local tensions.
But then Diocletian happened.
Diocletian, yes. Around 303 AD, things got much, much worse. This period is what we call the Great Persecution.
The Great Persecution. Sounds ominous.
And it was. This was the most widespread, the most brutal official crackdown Christians had faced up to that point.
What did it involve?
Diocletian ordered the systematic destruction of Christian buildings, their homes.
Church is gone.
Churches, meeting places, and the burning of their sacred texts, Bibles, Gospels, destroyed.
Wow.
Plus widespread arrests, torture, execution. The methods were just horrific. Mutilation, burning, starvation.
And throwing them into gladiatorial contests. I read about that.
That too, yes. Making a spectacle of their deaths. It was incredibly cruel.
That's just chilling.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine that level of organized violence. How did it finally stop?
Well, remarkably, the Great Persecution officially ended in April 311.
311, okay.
With Galerius' Edict of Toleration. Galerius was one of the senior emperors, part of Diocletian's system.
And he just decided to stop.
Sort of. He was very ill at the time. Some say that played a part. But the edict granted Christians the right to practice their religion again.
So tolerance.
Tolerance, yes. But, and this is a really crucial point, it did not give them back any property that had been confiscated.
Okay. So they could worship, but they'd lost everything.
Pretty much. Buildings, land,
Yeah.
gone. Interestingly, Constantine and Licinius, who would later issue the Edict of Milan, were also signatories on Galerius' edict.
So they were already involved in this move towards tolerance.
Involved, yes.
Yeah.
Maybe even pushing for it behind the scenes, some speculate.
Right, so tolerance is granted in 311, but the wounds are still raw. And then just 2 years later, 313, Constantine declares himself a Christian after the Edict of Milan.
Well, he declared himself Christian after issuing the edict, yeah. He started attributing his success to the protection of the high god, as he put it.
This is where it gets really dramatic, isn't it? The conversion story. How did that actually happen? What are the accounts?
Right, this is where the historical accounts get really captivating, but also, layered with interpretation. There's actually an earlier vision mentioned.
Earlier than the famous one.
Yeah, in 310. A couple of years before the Milvian Bridge. A panegyric that's basically a formal praise speech.
Got it.
It talks about a vision of the pagan god Apollo appearing to Constantine. Apollo and Victoria, the goddess of victory.
Apollo, not Christ.
Apollo, yeah. Supposedly presenting him with laurel wreaths, signifying 30 years of power.
Huh. Where did this happen?
Some think maybe in a dream, possibly at a shrine of Apollo Granus in Gaul. What's fascinating is that Eusebius,
The Christian historian.
yeah, Constantine's later biographer, he sort of hints at this maybe, talking about tricennial crowns given by God. It shows how complex the religious landscape was. Constantine was moving between traditions, perhaps.
So the Apollo vision came first. That's really interesting. It paints a picture of that kind of mixed religious world.
Exactly. Syncretism was common. But okay, let's get to the really famous story, the one tied to his conversion proper.
The Battle of the Milvian Bridge, 312 AD.
The pivotal moment. This is where Christian sources, especially Eusebius in his Life of Constantine, describe this dramatic event just before the battle against Maxentius.
The vision in the sky.
That's the one. Eusebius says that around midday, Constantine saw a cross-shaped trophy formed from light, right above the sun.
Above the sun.
And with it, the Greek text, Totanica, by this conquer.
In hoc signo vinces, in Latin.
Exactly. And Eusebius even claims the entire army saw it.
The whole army. That's
Yeah.
a very public miracle.
Very public, very potent. It emphasizes this divine, undeniable intervention.
But wait, isn't there another account? From Lactantius. Does it match up?
Ah, good point. There is Lactantius. He was writing a bit earlier than Eusebius wrote that specific account in the Life.
And his version is different.
Slightly, yeah. Lactantius talks about a dream Constantine had the night before the battle.
A dream, not a daytime vision.
A dream. And in this dream, Constantine was told to mark his soldiers' shields with a heavenly sign of God.
On sign.
Lactantius describes it as looking like a sideways X with the top part curved around.
A sideways X, like the Chi Rho.
Many scholars think that's exactly what he meant. The Chi Rho, the first two letters of Christ's name in Greek. So a dream leading to a specific action, putting the symbol on the shields for protection.
Okay, so Eusebius, public daytime vision of a cross, Lactantius, private nighttime dream about a Christogram for the shields. Interesting differences.
Definitely. It suggests the story might have evolved in the telling, or perhaps different people emphasize different aspects. Even the exact symbol is debated.
How so?
Well, Eusebius's cross-shaped trophy could be a simple cross, like a T or a dagger shape. Lactantius clearly points towards something like the Chi Rho, or maybe a related symbol called the starogram.
Starogram.
Yeah, it combines the Greek letters tau, T, and rho, P, looking like a cross with a loop. Some even suggest other symbols that Christians used back then, like the Egyptian ankh or the crux ansata.
So it's a bit ambiguous.
A bit, yes. Later, Eusebius describes the standard Constantine had made after the dream, the labarum.
The labarum, right.
Had a pole, a crossbar, a wreath at the top with the Chi Rho monogram inside, jewels, gold, cloth hanging down, even portraits of Constantine and his sons. It became a really important imperial symbol with Christian meaning.
So whatever the specifics of the vision or dream, Constantine clearly adopted a Christian symbol, won the battle, and took Rome.
Absolutely. He defeated Maxentius at the Milvian Bridge, and his actions in Rome afterwards were very telling.
What did he do?
He entered the city, but, and this was a big deal, he skipped the traditional pagan sacrifices on the Capitoline Hill.
He didn't thank Jupiter for the victory.
Nope. Instead of going to the main temple, he went straight to the imperial palace. A very public snub to the old ways.
Wow. That must have sent shockwaves.
It certainly sent a message. Even the Arch of Constantine, built to celebrate the victory. It uses older reliefs showing sacrifices to Apollo and Hercules, but pointedly, nothing showing a sacrifice to Jupiter Optimus Maximus.
A deliberate omission.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that absence speaks volumes. And this leads us directly to the Edict of Milan in 313. What exactly did this do? Why is it such a cornerstone in this story of religion and power?
The Edict of Milan, which Constantine issued jointly with Licinius, his co-emperor in the East, was truly transformative.
How so?
It basically declared that everyone, Christians and all others, should have the freedom to follow whatever religion they thought was best. Complete freedom of religion.
For everyone, not just Christians.
For everyone. That's key. It was a massive leap from Galerius's earlier edict, which was just tolerance. This was active freedom. And crucially, it ordered the return of confiscated church property.
So they got their stuff back.
They got their stuff back, land, buildings. He was about redressing the wrongs of the persecutions. What's really insightful here, thinking about religion and power, is that it didn't make Christianity the only religion.
Right. It made the empire neutral, essentially.
Exactly. Religiously neutral, at least on paper.
Yeah.
It didn't outlaw paganism. It didn't establish Christianity as the state religion that would come much later, 380 AD, under Theodosius of the Surth.
Okay.
But the Edict of Milan massively elevated Christianity's status. It said religious worship was important for the empire's well-being. But you have to remember,
What's that?
many powerful people, especially in the army, the aristocracy, they were still pagan. They followed the traditional Roman ways.
So Constantine had to tread carefully.
Very carefully. His actions show this balancing act. For instance, coins minted for years after the Milvian Bridge still had images of Roman gods on them.
Really? Even after the vision?
For up to 8 years, yeah. And monuments like the Arch of Constantine, as we said, no overt Christian symbols early on. He had to appease these powerful non-Christian groups. It shows the complex dance between his personal faith and political reality.
It really highlights that this shift wasn't like flipping a switch. It was gradual.
Mm-hmm.
But Constantine's personal backing of the church grew stronger, right? He became a patron.
Oh, absolutely. His rise to power was the turning point. He became a massive patron of Christianity.
How did that patronage work? What did he actually do?
Well, he poured money into the church, funded the building of basilicas, these large public halls that became the model for churches.
Imperial money-building churches? That's new?
Totally new. He also gave privileges to the clergy. Things like tax exemptions, freedom from certain civic duties, that really boosted the church as an institution.
Made it attractive to be clergy, maybe.
Definitely strengthened their position.
Yeah.
And he promoted Christians to higher-ranking jobs in his government. He ordered the return of property stolen during Diocletian's time. And he gave the church massive gifts of land and wealth.
So he was actively using imperial resources and authority to build up the church.
Without a doubt. He was investing heavily in its infrastructure and status.
And the founding of Constantinople,
Yeah,
his new capital. That seems hugely symbolic of this shift.
it really is. Between 324 and 330, he takes the old city of Byzantium and transforms it into Constantinople, New Rome.
You wrong.
And unlike old Rome, steeped in pagan history and temples,
Right.
Constantinople was designed from the ground up with Christian architecture. Churches inside the walls, very few, if any, pre-existing pagan temples given prominence. It was a statement.
A Christian capital for a changing empire. But building a new city, that costs a fortune. Where did the money come from? Did non-Christians have to pay?
That's an interesting point. Those who hadn't converted, well, they indirectly helped finance it. Christian writers later suggested Constantine wanted to discourage pagan practices. Maybe funding dried up for some temples, they fell into disrepair, and their wealth ended up in the imperial treasury.
So not necessarily forced closures, but a shift in resources.
More likely that, yeah. Most modern historians think it wasn't usually forceful destruction at this stage. More like imperial favor shifted dramatically. Constantine still valued educated people, pagan or Christian. His court had both.
Really?
Yeah, even late in his reign, maybe 2/3 of his top officials were still non-Christian, so it wasn't a total sweep yet.
So a gradual shift in resources and favor, but not yet outright suppression across the board. But his laws started to reflect Christian values more, didn't they?
They did, increasingly. You see it in things like abolishing crucifixion.
White crucifixion.
For reasons of Christian piety, reverence for how Christ died, he replaced it with hanging.
Okay. What else?
Sunday was declared an official day of rest.
Sunday. Important for Christians, but also for Sol Invictus, the sun god Constantine was linked to earlier.
Exactly. A clever move, perhaps.
Yeah.
Markets closed, public offices shut, though farming was allowed, and freeing slaves.
Yeah.
Practical exceptions.
Yeah, and other laws. Anything else stand out?
Some laws were seen as quite humane for the time. Prisoners had to get daylight. Branding criminals on the face was banned, maybe reflecting a sense of human dignity, God's image.
Interesting.
And he ordered public gladiatorial games to be eliminated in 325. Though, like a lot of these things, enforcement wasn't instant or universal.
Still, significant changes. Clear signs of Christian ethics influencing Roman law. And he supported Christian texts, too.
Oh, yes. In 331, he commissioned Eusebius him again to produce 50 copies of the scriptures.
50 Bibles.
Probably 50 gospel books,
Yeah.
more likely. Complete Bibles were still huge and expensive to produce, but these were for the new churches in Constantinople, a major state-funded project to equip his capital's churches.
Wow. And he built churches himself.
Absolutely. The first Hagia Irene in Constantinople was his commission, celebrating peace after beating Licinius. Others, too, dedicated to saints. Christian services were even held in his own mausoleum, which later became the Church of the Holy Apostles. Tradition credits him with founding many others, too.
So he wasn't just passively allowing Christianity. He was actively shaping the empire's religious identity using his power.
He absolutely was, and this fundamentally changed the role of the emperor regarding the church.
How so? What precedent did he set?
His reign basically established the idea of the Christian emperor. Emperors started seeing themselves as responsible for their subjects' spiritual well-being.
Responsible to God for the empire's faith.
In a way, yes. They felt they had a duty to uphold orthodoxy, correct doctrine. The church, usually through bishops' councils, would define what was orthodox.
And the emperor's job was to enforce it.
Enforce it, suppress heresy, keep unity, ensure God was worshipped properly across the empire. It created this really complex relationship between church and state.
A powerful emperor getting involved in religious doctrine.
That sounds potentially tricky. Did Constantine jump into those debates?
Oh, he definitely did. He wasn't shy. As early as 316, he was asked to step in and sort out the Donatist dispute in North Africa.
A schism within the church. Exactly. But the really big one was in 325.
Okay.
He convened the First Council of Nicaea.
Nicaea. That's huge. The Nicene Creed comes from that, right?
It does. This was the first major empire-wide attempt to define Christian orthodoxy, mainly to deal with the Arian controversy.
Arianism. That was about the nature of Christ, whether he was fully God.
Precisely. Was Jesus divine in the same way as God the Father, or was he a created being? Big theological debate.
And Constantine presided over this.
He called the council, attended sessions, pushed for agreement. But here's the twist. His own views seem to shift.
How do you mean?
Well, Nicaea condemned Arianism, but later, Constantine actually recalled Arius himself from exile, and he banished Athanasius of Alexandria.
Athanasius, the big defender of the Nicene view.
The very same. So it shows Constantine's views might have evolved, or maybe politics played a role in who was in or out of favor. It's complicated.
That really underscores his immense influence, maybe even his own theological uncertainty or just pragmatism, and his own baptism. That's another curious part of the story.
It is. Tradition says he was only baptized right before he died, in May 337.
Why wait so long? He'd been ruling as a Christian emperor for decades.
He'd been a catechumen, someone learning the faith for most of his adult life. One theory is he wanted to delay baptism to wash away all his sins right at the end, avoiding the risk of sinning after baptism.
Ah, the clean slate idea.
Possibly. And there's debate about who baptized him. Some say the Arian bishop Eusebius of Nicaea.
An Arian bishop baptizing the emperor who called Nicaea.
I know, right? Others claim Pope Sylvester's spin in Rome, but that's less likely historically. It does show that Arian-leaning figures were powerful in the Eastern court and church at that time.
And his son and successor was Arian too.
Constantius II, yes. He favored the Arian position. So the debate definitely didn't end with Constantine.
So even his deathbed baptism reflects the ongoing theological currents and complexities. Now, what about the other religions, the traditional Roman ones? How did his favor towards Christianity affect them?
Well, his stance definitely evolved. As we mentioned early on, until about 325, his coins and imagery linked him to Sol Invictus, the sun god.
Right.
He seemed to tolerate sacrifices, even supported building some new temples initially.
But that changed.
It did. Towards the end of his reign, the sources suggest he started ordering the pillaging and tearing down of some Roman temples.
Ordering destruction. That's a major shift from neutrality.
A very significant shift, yes. Moving from tolerance and patronage of Christianity towards active suppression of paganism, at least in some cases.
And did his policies have ripples beyond the empire? Like in Persia?
They did, indirectly. Persia, ruled by the Sasanian dynasty, generally tolerated its Christian minority. Constantine supposedly even wrote to the Persian king, Shapur II, around 324, asking him to protect the Christians there.
Trying to extend his protection.
Seems like it, but as Christianity became the favored religion of Rome, Persia's great rival,
Oh,
Persian Christians started looking suspicious to the Sasanian rulers. Were they loyal to Persia, or were there sympathies with Christian Rome?
seen as a potential fifth column.
Exactly. There is an anonymous Christian account claiming Shapur II arrested Christian leaders, hit them with double taxes, basically saying, you guys seem to be siding with Rome, our enemy. So Constantine's embrace of Christianity created new problems for Christians outside the empire.
Oh, the law of unintended consequences. So this whole massive transformation from persecution to imperial favor, the emperor getting involved in doctrine, the impact on other faiths, it's often summed up as the Constantinian shift. What does that term really capture?
The Constantinian shift.
Yeah.
It's a term popularized by the theologian John H. Yoder that tries to describe this deep entanglement, this political and theological merging of the imperial government and the Catholic Church, starting in the 4th century with Constantine and Nicaea.
So the birth of the state church idea.
Essentially, yes. It signifies this fundamental change where Christianity wasn't just tolerated or favored, but became intertwined with the structures of power, influencing laws, culture, everything. And the state, in turn, influenced the church.
But is it that simple? Was it a single shift?
Well, that's debated. Many historians now prefer to talk about a Constantinian moment or a more gradual process. They argue it wasn't a clean break, maybe not permanent in the way shift implies, and the relationship kept evolving, often with lots of tension. But the term Constantinian shift definitely points to that critical period where the whole game changed for Christianity and its place in the world.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what does it all mean? Constantine's reign was undeniably a watershed moment, a hinge point in history.
Absolutely.
Christianity goes from being this persecuted sect to the favored religion of the Roman Empire, whether it's driven by his genuine faith, sharp political calculation, or probably
A mix of both.
a complex mix of both, yeah. His actions had these profound, lasting consequences. They shaped the religious, the political landscape of the West for centuries, and arguably set precedents for church-state relations we still grapple with.
Definitely. And it leaves us, and you, our listener, with a big question to think about.
Which is,
Considering this really tangled web of personal belief, political power, institutional growth, how do you think Constantine's decisions ultimately shaped Christianity itself and the Roman Empire? What were the gains, what were the losses in this monumental transformation?
a lot to ponder there.
For sure.
Thanks for listening. Write us in the comments your opinion on the episode and what other topics you would like us to talk about. Subscribe to the channel to help us reach more listeners. Thank you and have an amazing day.